Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I am a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph. I am assigned in Freiburg, Switzerland, where I am a doctoral candidate in dogmatic theology at the University of Freiburg. And what else is new? I just wrote a book, which is sweet, and that book is going to be published in 2 months. And that book is called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. And it's a book with no footnotes. So it's a book that is meant to be read and to be enjoyed, and hopefully to aid you in your attempts at living a coherent life. So the basic idea is like a first chapter about happiness, and then a second chapter about like the means to happiness, the different means that God makes available. And then the third chapter is about the life of virtue. And then chapters 4 and 5 are kind of a deep dive into prudence, and then 6, 7, and 8 are about how prudence gives you what you need to be bold, to be certain, to be confident. So yeah, you can think about it as like a kind of guide to choosing well, or a little guide for practical wisdom. And I enjoyed writing it, and by enjoyed I mean that I agonized over writing it, and now it's done being written, and I'm glad that it's done being written. So it's something like enjoyment. But yeah, I hope that it's helpful for you. That's available on Amazon for pre-order, and then it will be available for like normal order, or it will be shipped on April 18th. And then what else? Cool announcements. Oh yeah, I contribute to a podcast called God's Planning with 4 other Dominican friars. Things that are cool about God's Planning are many, but I will limit myself to one. We're having retreats this summer. So we're actually having 3 retreats. So 2 in July and 1 in August. So there's going to be a retreat for all comers, and then a retreat for young adults. So that'd be like young persons aged 21 through 33. The idea there is you have to be old enough to drink, and then young enough not to have surpassed our Lord during his earthly sojourn. And then the Young Men's Wilderness Retreat. So check out godsplanning.org for details on all those things. Now, I'm going to sit up. I'm going to center my caboose because it's just embarrassingly off-center like normal. That's something that horrified my mom. And now I'm going to talk about the life of the councils. So the evangelical councils. So you saw that the title of this here particular live stream was Poverty, Chastity, and Obedience for Everyone. Why would we put it in just those terms? Well, when we typically hear about those things, we associate them with religious life. So we tend to think, religious are called to those things, but I am called to other things, which aren't bad. They're just different. So God bless you and God bless me, and let's move on with our lives. But it is not so simple. So the call to live the evangelical counsels is issued to all Christians, all right? So not just to religious. We draw a distinction between living the evangelical counsels in spirit and in fact, and then living the evangelical counsels in spirit. And so generally we would say that religious are called to live the counsels in spirit and in fact, and that lay persons, or persons who are not in the religious state, are called to live them in spirit. Why would we say that? Well, let's return to the scriptures as a source for this teaching. Here, you can consult a variety of texts, but we'll limit ourselves to Matthew 19. And in Matthew 19, you have the Lord's teaching on marriage. And then after the Lord's teaching on marriage, Peter is like, wow, crazy talk. You just made it sound really intense. Perhaps it's better not to get married. To which our Lord responds with a clarification of different forms of eunuchs. Some who are born so, some who are made so by others, and some who are such for the kingdom of heaven. Usually, in that particular description is identified the call to the virtue of and the counsel of chastity. And then the next encounter that's detailed is the encounter with the rich young man who asks what one has to do in order to inherit eternal life. And our Lord responds with a description of the counsels, all right? With a description of the commandments. So he lists basically commandments 4 through 10 in a somewhat different order. And then the man responds and says, all of these I have followed from my youth. What more do I lack? To which our Lord responds, one more thing is lacking to you. Go, sell all that you have, give to the poor, and then come follow me. So when St. Thomas reads this passage, he sees in the go and the follow me piece a call to the counsel of obedience, and the sell all that you have and give to the poor, he sees in that the counsel of poverty. All right, so we have in this chapter, Matthew 19, a call to each of the 3 counsels. And the idea is that we are all called to observe them in some way, shape, or form, because the counsels are very, very efficacious means, or to say that more simply, they're a really good way to go about living the life of the commandments, all right? So when we talk about the commandments, usually we talk about the 10 commandments, but you can kind of summarize the whole law, as our Lord does, with 2 commands, which is to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So the whole law can be encapsulated in this call to love, a love of God and a love of those whom God entrusts to you. But if we're to live this love, we can't just shoot for, what would you say, like the least fulfillment of that law. We seek to kind of go beyond it. We seek to be abundant in our response to those commandments. And typically the way that is counseled in order to attain to that state is by following this way of poverty, chastity, and obedience. All right. So maybe just a word then about what this looks like and what this looks like in the life of a religious, and then what this looks like in the life of a layperson. So in a religious life, you take vows. Okay, and so a vow is an act of religion. So religion is a virtue whereby you give to God what is His due. All right, and a vow is a particular way of giving to God what is His due. And in the vows, with the evangelical counsels being the kind of matter of the vows, you give to God your possessions, right, with poverty. You give to God your body with chastity, and you give to God your soul with obedience. All right? And when you make that self-offering, it has a way of simplifying and purifying your life. Simplifying because you are made to set aside certain secondary goods. So in the case of a religious, right, many religious don't possess things personally. All right, so you set aside possessions and the management of those possessions. And then, religious life, you don't get married, you don't have a family. So you set aside the good of family life, the good of sexual intercourse, the good that go with that. And then with respect to obedience, you set aside a certain degree of like providence for your own life, a certain degree of like self-rule or autonomy. And you submit to a legitimate superior so that what? So that you can have your life run for you better? Not necessarily, but so that you can look to him or look to her for concrete direction as to what path you should take. All right. So that's simplicity, but then also it has a way of purifying us too. So when we have a kind of a stance towards goods, exterior goods and goods of the body and then goods of the soul, that is, kind of asking God to heal us of our attachments to those things. It has a way of, kind of reversing the effects of original sin. So instead of being like, I want to gather all kinds of goods and having that concupiscence inflamed, what St. Thomas would associate with the lust of the eyes, right? Rather that's kind of cooled, all right? That's kind of curbed. And then so too with, goods of the body and goods of the soul, insofar as we're no longer as consumed with thoughts of, sexual intercourse or with thoughts of managing our own lives. And as a result of which, the corresponding effects of original sin, like the lust of the flesh and the pride of life, are also cooled and healed. So in effect, what you have is a threefold movement with the vows. You offer yourself to God, and then God kind of, I don't know what you would exactly describe it as, but he kind of curbs your care for secondary goods so that you can be more wholehearted in that offering. And he also has a way of healing the wounds incurred through sin, both original and personal, so that in that offering you are made yet more perfectly whole. So how does this apply to the life of a layperson? Well, I think you can just take those very concrete things and map them out in your own life. So when it comes to possessions, I think the fact that we are Christian means that there is a term to our accumulation, all right? So, for instance, like to have surplus goods, well, you might be planning for the future, you might be planning for your children's future, all of which are good things. But at a certain point, you probably recognize that you're being called to give of your substance and not just of your excess, right? Like the widow's mite. So I think in that case, it's good to have a disposition of giving away, as it were, not just in the sense of tithing, but also looking to our possessions with a healthy expectation of the place that they occupy in our lives, rather than relying upon them too much or becoming overly attached to them or even enslaved to them. So because of the fact that you're a Christian, that might mean that you don't get the nicest things. That might mean that you don't always update from whatever your last Mac was to whatever your new Mac is. or that you don't always like whatever, buy the new iPhone or the new iWatch or Apple Watch or whatever it's called. These things, right? Because your life has, it has a kind of evangelical shape, and part of that call to evangelical perfection is a call to a kind of poverty, right? So to give not only of your excess, but of your substance, and then to set aside care for certain good things on account of the fact that you are called to a higher good thing, right? And then to make of that an offering of yourself. So, you can see this in the lives of the saints. You know, I mean, here we're talking about laypersons, so not just talking about consecrated persons, because the point is to apply those insights to the lay life, which most of you who are watching this live stream would live or do live, right? So you can think of, certain married saints, or think of, I'm thinking here of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. So Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati was convicted that he was not called to the priesthood. He thought that he could do more good for the people to whom he was sent by becoming a mining engineer. And so he went to the Polytechnic University of Turin. He had finished all of his courses but one at the time that he died. But he shows a real spirit of abandon, right? A real spirit of evangelical poverty, chastity, and obedience in the way in which he lived his life. Think about poverty, like he had a lot of money because his father was the editor of La Stampa, and he often, gave that money away to poor people. He would even give away his bus fare or his train fare, and then he would just make up the time by running to and fro, riding his bicycle. Sometimes he was given very expensive gifts, and then he sold them and distributed them to the many, many poor people in Turin, whom he took care of. And then with respect to like chastity, there was some concern with the advance of his cause, regarding his relationship with Lara Hidalgo. But it came out that no, he was always chaste in his relationships. Certainly a man of great friendships, right? But didn't form inordinate attachments with women, ones that would imperil his spiritual life. At the end of the day, chastity is a virtue, so that's something, that we're all called to in a very straightforward way. But also he was content to set aside that relationship when certain obstacles were posed to it. And that leads us to obedience, right? He wasn't always on the same page with his parents. And he suffered as a result of that, like when they forbade him from seeing this young woman, Lara Hidalgo, whom he loved very much, right? But also, he was deferent to them. He was obedient to them in the way in which he knew how to be. So they were astonished at his funeral when all of these poor people whom he had been taking care of showed up. So he wasn't ostentatious about the way in which he lived his life, but he tried to be deferent. He tried to be humble before his parents, to the point where when he got sick with poliomyelitis, I think his grandmother was sick at the same time and dying. And so he just didn't mention it, right? He just didn't want to get in people's way or draw attention to himself. So you can see, here's a man who really lived the spirit of the councils. He actually made profession as a third order Dominican with the name Girolamo Savonarola, who was the name of a great preacher, Dominican preacher at the end of the 15th century Reform. So that's just one way in which we see those particular counsels applied in the life of a lay person. So I pose that to you as a challenge and as an encouragement. And now we are going to answer some questions. Party on, Wayne. All right. We got some greetings here at the top. Hello, 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 hello. Great. All right. Boom. All right, here we go. First question. We're going to start with a non-controversial one because those are the best. I'm just kidding. All right, so here we go. I'm going to center this on the frame. So there we go. I'm moving things around because why not? Russell Valian says, what do you think of the Pope and the bishops closing down the Latin Mass? Don't love it. I have many thoughts, and I actually recorded a video called Processing Traditionis Custodes on this channel. So that's like a 35-minute response plus a couple of questions to this particular one. My general thought is I don't share the same concerns regarding the Latin Mass as the Holy Father does. And then as it is being implemented by certain bishops, it just doesn't bear out an anxiety of mine. I celebrate the Dominican rite, which is a form of the extraordinary form proper to the Dominican friars. So it's, in the West, it's in the Roman rite, as it were, but a particular expression proper to our consecrated tradition. And so, I have a great love for and sympathy with. And my experience of TLM communities is not that they don't accept the teaching of the Second Vatican Council, right? Or that they're posing serious obstacles to ecclesial communion or unity. That's just not my experience. I was a little upset too by the way in which the process unfolded, because right now we're in the midst of a big old process of synodality, but the way in which this decision was made was a survey submitted or circulated to bishops and then a decision rendered on it. So I think that betrays a little bit of, what would you say, bias in the process. So that causes me some concern and consternation. I mean, I think it's supposed to put power in the hands of diocesan bishops, but my fear is that it will become a highly politicized issue, and it will just depend on who is in power, which will lead to greater consternation among the lay faithful, rather than a kind of stability and permanence in liturgical practice. Yeah, I think that I don't know what the logic of it was. I mean, it's explained, but if it's the concern is doctrinal allegiance or kind of like filial piety, I think that there are ways to address that, like through the congregation of the doctrine of the faith, but I don't get the impression that that's being done or being addressed. So that also causes me concern. And yeah, I mean, I just worry in general about these types of decisions or the kind of politicization of the ecclesial process in a way that just gets real, yikes, real complicated. So in general, I'm still sad about it and angry about it, but working my little way through and hoping to have good and fruitful conversations with those who are too. So, yep, that's my somewhat sober response to your question. All right. DDD. Paul C. asks, is listening to rap music or music with vulgar or bad language sinful? Does it matter on how much or how serious the language is? I think it does matter, like what you suggested at the end. Wow, my levels are super saturated. I'm going to dial this here microphone down a skosh. So I think it does matter circumstantially. Here are my thoughts. I think that the governing virtue is prudence, and prudence specifically commanding subordinated virtues of like temperance and then purity, all right? Even chastity in certain situations. So I think that music, which describes like very explicit materials with explicit language in a way that is intended to kind of stir you up, is bad. I think that it's evil, and then I think that it should be eschewed. It should be shunned. So I think that occasional songs may toe the line where they touch on such themes, but it's not the central concern, the main point of the thing. And I think it's fine to listen to that music, but cognizant of the fact that, our whole culture is immersively, it seems, given over to the things of this world in such a way that it really does threaten to obscure our vision of the things beyond this world. And so I just don't think that we can be naive about the fact that, if we just listen to a lot of sexual music, which is kind of towing the line, that it's going to have a cumulative effect on us. So I think the governing virtue there is prudence. But I don't think like every song that has one swear word is therefore, to be condemned. I think that the logic has just to be a little bit more subtle and nuanced. I think that a lot of contemporary rap music is kind of beyond the pale, but there are exceptions, and so I don't think that a one-size-fits-all rule ought to be applied in those circumstances. Boom. Intellective Soul asks, is jaywalking wrong? I tend to think not, in the sense that there are certain instances in which jaywalking can be wrong, whether for objective or subjective reasons, like if you give bad example, right? Or if you do it just because you're contemptuous of the law, or because you want to prove to the others who are standing on the corner that they are weak-willed and otherwise deficient as human beings. There can be lots of reasons for which it might be sinful or wrong, as it were. But I think that here, I recorded a video on the channel recently about whether or not you can break the law and in what circumstances. I think that it's 1 a.m, you're coming home from the train station, you're a single woman, aged 22, and it's a big city. I don't think that you should wait on a corner, right? I just think that's stupid. And I think that if the legislator could have foreseen the circumstances, he or she would not want you to wait on a corner either. And so I think that you use your reason, you use prudence to make a determination. I'm not going to wait here to get mugged. I'm just going to cruise my little way on down the highway of life, right? So I think that, in general, there's a kind of prima facie stance that we adopt with respect to the law. It's a law, we should follow it. But then in certain circumstances, right, you're a thinking human being who is ordered towards a good and healthy goal, and sometimes the law, as it is like explicitly stated, can be an obstacle to that. And in those instances, in those cases, I think that you should move on. All right. Here we go. Frederick Court says, marriage fell apart when parents stopped choosing spouses. All right, I'm not going to comment on that. Here we go. Yajun Wan says, make yourself a living sacrifice, which is cool because that offers me an opportunity to expatiate further on the theme that I addressed at the top of the hour. So the theme here is concerning the life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The question is specifically like how to live that as a layperson. And a controlling image for the evangelical counsels is the Holocaust offering. Okay, so Gregory the Great makes this association in his homilies on the book of the prophet Ezekiel. He says basically if a man offers all that he is, right? Basically he says if a man offers all that he is, all that he has, all that he does to God, it is a Holocaust offering. And then this is applied by St. Thomas to the religious life by virtue of the fact that, by poverty you offer your goods, by chastity you offer your body, by obedience, you offer your soul, and what it effectively does is it offers the whole person to God. Why a Holocaust offering, you think? That sounds like a pretty severe way to describe this seemingly beautiful consecration. So in the Old Testament, you had different offerings that you could make. So you could offer like tithes, first fruits, oblations of whatever sort, like cereal offerings, wave offerings, sin offerings, etc. In practically all of these cases, when you go to offer the sacrifice in the temple, part of the host, like part of the victim, is given, so you're killing an animal, you're draining it of blood, and you're burning part of it on the altar. So typically part of it would go to the priest for his sustenance, part of it would be returned to you for your sustenance, and then part of it would be burned on the altar, for the praise of God, or for the pacification or expiation, or for the whatever you would call it. But in the case of the Holocaust offering, the entire animal would be burned on the altar, okay? Thereby signifying that God is the source and the end of all of creation, right? And that he is worthy of all of it. So it's not just an economic arrangement, it's worship. And Holocaust offerings bring that to the fore. So this idea of a Holocaust offering is used as a way by which to capture, the genius, as it were, of religious consecration. But that same logic can be applied to all Christians by virtue of the fact that, by your baptism, you are marked, with a baptismal character as belonging to God. And so your whole life is rendered unto him, not only as your creator, but as your redeemer, right? Like as one who sent his only begotten Son in human flesh to die for love of you, that you might return to him by that same love. And so I think that this idea of consecration, born of baptism, and then the subsequent idea of a giving of one's whole self is present throughout the Christian tradition and applicable to all states. So, bam. Oh, hey, cheers. Hey, Bongi Masuku says, Father Gregory, you are an amazing teacher. When did you know that God wanted you to join the Dominicans? Thanks, for one. I appreciate that. So I guess I thought about it for the first time the summer after my freshman year in college. And apologies if you've already heard the story. I'm going to repeat it. You can just take a little coffee break right now, or you can just do something else, I suppose. So I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville. And when I went, my sisters, both of whom had been there before me, they counseled me not to date my first year, just to get to know different people and make good friends and stuff like that. Not that that's impossible when you're dating, but it might prove a little bit harder. And so I went, I did that. And then that year I heard a lecture given by a professor of philosophy at St. Louis University named Eleanor Stump. And she spoke on Aquinas on the nature of love. And it blew me away. I was just so jazzed. I was just like, man, this is awesome. This corresponds to things that I wish I had thought previously or in a more coherent way, and now here they are all just kind of served up for me in a way that's it's just awesome, incisive and precise and size. Yeah, so I picked up a book about St. Thomas Aquinas, like a life of St. Thomas Aquinas that summer, called The Quiet Light, which is historical fiction. Super charming, very delightful. And by the time that I finished it, I was like, I want to love the Lord the way that he loves the Lord. Because previously, I had a lot of desires, to be good, to be holy, to be given. to do good things, great things even, right? But I didn't really realize, or I didn't recognize how those desires came together or coalesced in a state of life. And then when I encountered the concrete witness of St. Thomas Aquinas, I was like, boom, there it is. I want to do that. I want to love like him. So that was it. Here we go. Dude, we got some sweet Dominican questions here. I guess that's what you get when you make the particular topic about religious life. All right, so on a personal level, how has your commitment to the Dominican order enhanced your sense of the love and beauty of Jesus Christ? So that's a good question. I'm now going to apply chapstick, which I do, it seems like I'm practically every occasion where I'm speaking for more than like 5 seconds. Why hath thy lips so dry? So yeah, I think that my general experience of being a Dominican is that you adopt a form of life which was given by God to a particular founder, in my case, St. Dominic, and then which is kind of, I suppose, transposed through the sanctity of different Dominican saints who have come since, who have kind of come in his wake, like St. Thomas Aquinas, for example. And then that like fills out, as it were, or gives more definite shape to that form of life. And then when you enter, the hope is that you would just pour yourself into that form of life, and then the form becomes your form, or you yourself are molded to the form as it was communicated by God and as it is communicated through subsequent generations in the context of this, like religious congregation or this particular religious order. So the Dominican life is a contemplative life. And it's contemplative of a certain sort. So it's, usually when you hear contemplative, you think prayerful, but not only is it prayerful, it's studious. There's a kind of conviction at the heart of the Dominican charism that we come to know God, right, by inquiry, and that God gives himself to the mind. And so that's true of, prayer, meditation. That's also true of study. And I think that St. Thomas Aquinas is a leading light in this regard, and I certainly have benefited a great deal from his teaching, but also benefited a great deal from his pedagogy, from his having taken me by the hand and led me through the mysteries as he sees them, such that I too might be shaped by those mysteries after the manner in which he was shaped by those mysteries, and so adopt this particular cast of mind which has come to characterize the Dominican life through the generations. And so it's imparted to me a particular way of looking at God and all things in light of God, which I think has opened up a space in my life for acknowledging that, they're true and they're good and they're beautiful. So yeah, I think that it's the beauty of the truth which really gets me most. And I know that's a somewhat controversial thing to say when in many circles people are kind of exhausted with arguments and grow weary of truth claims. But yeah, I'm still intoxicated on the words and the word. And I think that bears with it a particular beauty, which the Dominican charism creates a space for the acknowledgement of. And I myself have benefited deeply, deeply, deeply from that in the context of our liturgical life, our fraternal life, right, our vowed life, but, in this particularly contemplative way. Boom. So thanks for that question. All right, Paul C. asks, is wishing a Jewish person Happy Hanukkah wrong as a Catholic? What about Muslim holidays and other religion? No, I don't think it's wrong. I don't think that's I suppose in a pluralist society, the fear might be that by saying happy this or happy that, you're encouraging the practice of this and that, as if to say that you're validating those religions and claiming them to be true, which, for Judaism, I suppose, would be less troubling, or more so for Islam, and even more so for things that fall kind of outside the bounds of monotheism. I could see where that concern would arise, but I don't think so. I don't think you have to worry about that. I think it's generally understood as a pleasantry, right? You're well-wishing another individual to enjoy the context of his or her life as it is framed religiously. You're not saying I support you in all your religious commitments and I encourage you in all your religious commitments, and I don't think that you ought to convert to the Catholic faith because there's nothing for you to be found there because you have everything that you need, and that is why I am saying Happy Hanukkah. No, don't worry. Wish away. C.J. Hayden, Blessed Pier Giorgio is always labeled a socialist. Is this just a distortion of evangelical poverty? Yeah, I think it's also a misprision of his time and the peculiar setting of his time. Recall, he's coming right before Mussolini, who was a fascist. So things in the Italian political realm are a little bit complicated. So yeah, I think it's too rough and ready just to say he was a socialist, therefore whatever. Oops, never mind. That's not a question. Here we go. I have a follow-up question on your video about fallen angels. Does Jesus' resurrection and absolution of sins also work for angels? It does not, because angels are irreformable, because there's nothing further, as it were, for them to learn, insofar as God has already supplied them with the knowledge of all the things that they need in order to attain to their end. And once they choose against it, they reap forever the harvest of the seed sown in that one choice. So angels proceed to their end by one choice. We proceed to our end by many choices. And before we die, our wills are reformable, whereas angels do not live according to the same kind of mode of discursion or unfolding. They live by one choice towards their end, whereas in the case of human beings, we've got a little more in the way of time and space. All right. All right. Joshua Castro Donathan says, I feel like we should be more worried about the progressive side of the church than the rad trad side. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And that's why I suppose that's why many people, and myself included, are discouraged about the proceeding of the synodal way. I don't know if you saw this, but in Germany, there was like a kind of ecclesial sponsored coming out party where a bunch of people identified as, same-sex attracted or gay. And this was, this didn't actually merit any clarification, it seems, from local bishops or from the Holy Father. It's just, yeah, I mean, obviously he's limited in his prudence and in the execution thereof, and so not all things are going to be addressed. And sometimes, like the critically minded, which I number myself among, it's going to be very easy to find fault. It's going to be especially easy to find fault with seeming inconsistencies. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think that the Holy Father has the same vantage on this particular problem as Americans do, for instance. Like with Latin Mass communities, I think it's something like between 40 and 45% of Latin Mass communities are in the United States. And that's not necessarily a context with which he himself is especially familiar. So if you're closer to it and you love it more, you're going to have a much greater, understanding and sympathy for. Yeah. And so that causes great frustration, especially when things are happening, like you follow the German synodal way and these votes are being cast like 168 to 28 concerning, same-sex unions and like the ongoing need for the ordained priesthood and stuff like that. It's like, whoa, crazy town. But it's just kind of cruising on down the old highway of life. So yes, disconcerting, but, Jesus has won the victory. We're already partaking of the merits of his most precious blood. And yeah, many things will fail in the course of our lifetime. Even ecclesial things will fail, but the universal church won't fail, and God will provide a way through. So thanks for that. All right. Student asks, how to grow in divine love when making a chastity private vow? Wow. All right. So when it comes to making a private vow of chastity, one, that's something that you would discuss with a spiritual director. Right? It's not something to be undertaken just like, about time I make a private vow of chastity. And then if you want to do it as a consecrated virgin in the context of, like your diocesan life, that'd be something that you would work out with the diocesan bishop. But when it comes to growing in divine love, growth in divine love is always framed, as it were, by the means that God gives. So his Christ, his church, his sacraments, grace, virtues, gifts of the Holy Spirit, etc. And your state of life is part of that equation. So if you make a private vow of chastity, you're seeking to grow in love in a celibate state, which means that you have a particular attachment to our Lord Jesus Christ of a kind of exclusive sort, right? So that means curbing your desire for love that kind of comes out sideways. So I think it's good in those instances just to be on the lookout for, like loneliness, sadness, anxiety, which makes manifest the desire of your heart for real companionship, and then find ways by which of directing that to the Lord that are fruitful, and that ultimately yield a deeper relationship, a fuller friendship with him. Boom. All right. All right, we got another question about the fallen angels. Great. Father Pine, the fallen angels casted from heaven came to earth and took different forms, pagan gods, and deceived people. What are your thoughts about it? Yeah, the scriptures seem to admit that as a possibility. Like pagan gods are either one or the other. They're either non-existent or they're demons. But it seems to me that St. Paul kind of leaves the door open to both interpretations, like when he's talking about Christians consuming meat sacrificed to idols. He sometimes is like, no, demons. And then he's also like, weaker brother principle. So, yeah, I think that you can affirm both things. The kind of tendency since the late 19th century in a Durkheimian vein has just been to say, like, yeah, they're not really pagan gods. They're not really anything. It's just like community dynamics. Like the tribe is worshiping itself. I don't know about that, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but maybe there's an element of that also at work. So I think that at this point you're free to speculate as to both options. So yeah, I just don't really have much experience with non-Christian cultures, so I just haven't seen it at work, and I don't have a good feel for it. All right, study the difference between agape and eros. Okay, I think there you go, at student, perfect, great. And a good book to consult on that particular issue is called The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis, where he talks about different modes of love. All right, we got some sweet, sweet questions and some sweet, sweet responses. Oh, I'm yawning. It's embarrassing. All right, we got more people. Clarifying about music, great answer. Prudence, demons are behind pagan gods. Remember garbage in, garbage out. Good. If my Protestant... Okay, here we go. So Ginevra says, if my Protestant husband tells me not to give money to the church, do I have to obey him? Yeah, it depends on, whose money it is. And it also depends on, like the way in which your financial arrangements work. So you have a responsibility to tithe, okay? So that's something that is asked of you in God, communicated through the scriptures. I forget, is it the book of the prophet Malachi? Maybe like chapter 4? I think that's it. It's actually one of the only instances in the Old Testament where you're told to like put the Lord to the test. It's like tithe. Go for it. See what happens. So you are responsible for tithing. It's not explicitly stated that you need to tithe to your parish church. A typical practice for a lot of people is to tithe 10%, to give 5% to your local parish, and then 5% to other charitable causes. But that's not like defined as doctrine. So you have to find a way of giving money to charitable causes, right, that support the preaching of the word and the provision of the sacraments in some way, shape, or form. But if giving to your church might prove like an insurmountable or an insuperable hurdle in your relationship, then you might just consider giving money to other things while trying to have the conversation with your husband as to why you want to give to your parish church. So he can't, then the ancillary question is, whose money is it? So do you earn money of your own? And if so, do you tithe it? And the answer to that is yes. If you don't earn money of your own, then the question is, how do you understand in your relationship the apportionment of those means? Does your husband understand it as his money that you oughtn't to touch? If so, then that becomes more complicated, because I don't know that technically you have good grounds for giving his money away, even if you think that arrangement is unjust, because you also have made sacrifices in order to stay home, etc., etc. So that's a kind of jumbled response, but I hope it gives you some helpful principles for thinking it through. And we have other people responding. How can we tell if we or others are gossiping or just venting? When is gossip a mortal sin? Short answer is I don't know exactly, or I'm not going to be able to give you a satisfactory response that puts to rest all doubts. But I would say that so I think it's fine to vent, right? But I think that you have to vent with somebody who understands you and somebody who's not going to perpetuate the talk. You're also going to try to vent with somebody who isn't going to stir you up further and kind of like accompany you down an unending series of accusations and recriminations. So that's really indicative of the quality or character of the friendship which you're seeking to perfect or which you're seeking to find and to cultivate. When it comes to gossip, I think if you're just saying bad things about somebody because, one, like you can derive some enjoyment at their expense, or because mocking puts you in good esteem of others with whom you are present, or because it creates a kind of false solidarity among those who are talking. It makes you part of like an in-group. These things are all sinful, right? They're all sinful. And I think it becomes grave when you like really wound the other person, in a sense, like undermine his or her reputation or connections, friendships, prospects for the future, things like that, then I think it becomes mortal. Yeah, it might also become mortal depending on the gravity of the gossip, the way in which you're betraying a trust or a secret. That could also factor into. All right. Christine Live says, I've recently been trying to increase in holiness, and I am constantly now being bothered by the thoughts that I'm going to hell. It's really putting a lot of despair in my heart. Can you give me advice? Answer, yes. So those, I would say, just don't engage with those thoughts insofar as you have any control over them. A prayer that I have recommended before on a live stream, and I will recommend again now, is, Lord Jesus Christ, I cover myself in your most precious blood, and I bind and send to the foot of the cross these thoughts of despair, that you might do with them there what you will, or even just name them like, demons of despair. So cover yourself in the Lord's precious blood, send those thoughts to the foot of the cross, attempt to flee them and change the scene, as it were. So if you're sitting in the chapel and those thoughts crop up, take a little rosary walk, things like that. And I think that, the best thing you can do is just give it time, right? If you put pressure on yourself to rid yourself of those thoughts, it just increases the intensity. So you greet those thoughts and say, oh, it's you again, right? And see what you can do basically to dust it off, or to let it pass by, to remark as it passes by, as you try to train your mind back on God and the things of God. Great question. So Paul C., if watching pirated movies would be considered stealing, how would restitution be made? So good question. I can think of a variety of ways. Like, what would be the ordinary platform on which you would purchase a movie? So if it's the type of thing that you would get by, subscribing to Netflix, you could make a donation to Netflix, or you could subscribe to Netflix for a few months and not use the account or something like that. If you would ordinarily do it, through Amazon.com, maybe you rent those movies on Amazon.com. As far as gestures go, that's a little bit over the top. But at the end of the day, you're seeking to restore money lost to those from whom you have taken it. But if you establish that it's not possible, like the classic example is, you stole money from somebody and that somebody dies and that person has no relatives. Okay, what do you do then? Well, then you would make a comparable donation to a charity, okay? And it might even be nice if you try to associate that charity with the person. Say that person died of ALS, then you give it to whatever, like an ALS research society or something like that, which doesn't have dubious connections to Planned Parenthood. So yeah, those are some principles for sorting it through. Alrighty. Average thing I like, enjoyer. Great. I struggle with scrupulosity, so forgive me for asking this, but the other day I jokingly said, thank God it's Monday. Is this taking the Lord's name in vain, or is it more akin to profanity? Thank you. It's neither. Yeah, it's neither. You're thanking God that it's Monday. That's fine. It's said with a kind of exasperated sigh of relief, insofar as it's like ironic, insofar as it's joking. But it's like, it's a trope. Right? So it's a recognized form of speech. It's like a pleasantry, right? Or it's like a joke, or it's like the type of thing where the actual, like your use of the faculty of speech is just for, it's just for like brushing a thing aside. So no, don't worry about that. I wouldn't worry about that. All right, Regina Ritter. If a TV show or movie displays same-sex relationships and heterosexual couples committing fornication or adultery, not explicitly though, can you still watch it, or is that scandal? So scandal is when you watch a thing, and when you watch a thing, you communicate to other people who are also watching the thing that it's fine for you to watch the thing, okay? So it's like slowly cooking or boiling the frog, it's just like you just keep kind of communicating to those with whom you are, whatever, hanging out, like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic, but it's no big deal. We can watch this thing. We can like watch Game of Thrones, or we can watch whatever other TV show. I don't know exactly good examples, but you get it. So my general sense is the judgment as to whether or not you should expose yourself to these things is dependent on, so like gender. I think it's different for men and for women. I think that men are more easily aroused than women. That's a kind of gross characterization, as it were, or gender stereotype, but it's probably true. So I think that men have to be more careful about this, or more vigilant about this, where I think women is less so the case. Women have to worry about a little more about relationship porn, like the type of like crass, mawkish, kind of cloyingly sweet romances, which just get them all stirred up and then eventually disappoint them or make them look in the wrong places for satisfaction in relationships. And so if like these things are alluded to, that's one thing. If they're portrayed, that's another thing. And then how graphically they're portrayed is another thing. I think it's also fine, just to skip certain scenes. That's, like appropriate. I think like a movie may potentially be ruined by one like 12-second sex scene, but you can look up the timestamp, or you can subscribe to that Mormon site, which kind of scrubs movies, so that way you don't even have to encounter it or think about it, So there are a variety of ways around. But one is to know who you are, gender or like state in life or the culture from which you come. Like Europeans, in my experience, are much more sensitive to violence than they are to sexuality. Whereas I would say that Americans are more sensitive to sexuality than they are to violence, at least in, Catholic circles. So yeah, it's just going to depend on who you are, where you come from, what you're doing, and then the ways in which you can prudently try to avoid it. And yeah, I think those are good guidelines. Boom. All right, we got people saying things. And other things, this is the old, is it always sinful to lie, specifically thinking of right to know, such as vac status. Yeah, this is the old, is it always sinful to lie? Yeah, so I just recorded a video actually about this. I had a debate with Janet Smith, which you can look up, is like lying always a sin. I come down on the side of you can't lie. Specifically thinking of right to know, such as vac status. When people ask you your vaccine status, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't have the right to know. People can legally demand it of you depending on your work situation or depending on, where you're enrolled as a student or whether you're trying to travel or yada, yada. And then some people don't have the right to know. But if you say, none your business, then it seems to give you away, as it were. But, such is the nature of the world in which we live. So yeah, my go-to is I prefer not to describe I basically say I prefer not to divulge medical information, which is my go-to. And people are going to think what they're going to think, and that's fine. But, so far I haven't suffered terrible persecution as a result. All right. Here we go. Here we go. K. Flurry. Spoiler alert, he's Father Vanilla Bean. That's probably a reference to the fact that I have given safe answers in the past. All right. Thanks for elaborating on my statement, Father Gregory Pint. Cheers. Great. I'll share my thoughts. If possible, try going to retreat. Oh, yeah. All right, perfect. Mario Baratti, do you think Dominicans could go preaching in the street to strangers or out of public places? I think so. Yeah, I mean, we have done so in the past, 12 years since I entered the order. Usually we try to provide an occasion for it. So like, like we did metro caroling during like the Christmas season for a variety of years. So you just go with some instruments and then people who can sing a little bit. And then you have a bunch of other guys with like holy cards or rosaries who subsequently pass them out and then try to just, chat with people, engage people in conversation. And then we've done similar things at other like liturgical seasons or just kind of like random sporadically. My kind of go-to is I'm not really good at initiating conversations, but I hope to be good at responding. And like for instance, when I go to the airport, it's just a tough situation in which to initiate a conversation without freaking somebody out. So I always pray that I will have good conversations and that those with whom God wants me to have conversations would, for whatever reason, provoke it or identify it or sometimes or somehow, kind of move it in that particular direction, which is to say, like, approach me, talk to me, yada, yada, you get it. So the answer is yes. And yeah. Yep. We could always stand to do more of it. All right. When the last question was, I don't actually know. Yeah, I read that question. I didn't really know what to make of it. Arranged marriages or choosing each other rather than putting their kids first. If not, what do you think? So arranged marriage, I don't know anything about arranged marriages. But there are cultures, obviously, in which that's practiced. As to whether or not that's a good thing, I mean, it can be a good insofar as it underlines certain elements which may be lost in the current Western practice of the 21st century. Like love is a commitment to another person for the making up for the building up of a family. And I think that sometimes we lose that when we think about it as an elective friendship, which includes sexual intercourse whenever you want it. I mean, people can get that regardless of whether or not they're married. So maybe their desire for marriage is a little less even now. given that the social stigma for those who aren't married is even more radically reduced than it would have been, 15 years ago. So when it comes to putting each other first versus putting the kids first, I don't know exactly what that question would have entailed with respect to that particular point. But what would I say to that? Yeah, I think that, like when a man and a woman, choose to have a family, the end of that marriage is the procreation and education of family. And so they're for their children. They're for the building up of their family. And they do that in part by, or principally through, their love of each other. So like marriage is a sacrament which blesses the love of spouses so that they become a sign to each other of Christ's love for the church and vice versa. And so I think that you love your children in a certain and particular way through your spouse. So it's not as if you're choosing between. I mean, you're going to have concrete instances in which you're going to have to prefer, like the good of your kids to whatever, having a date out. But yeah, no, I think that insofar as you can hold the two together without pitting them against each other, that's for the best, right? But the primary end is the procreation and education of children, and then the secondary end is the mutual support of the spouses. All right. Do you have any advice for a person that feels they might have missed their vocation or do not have a vocation? Yeah. So I actually recorded a video about that on this channel a little while ago, and it's called like the vocation. So just search like Gregory Pine Vocation Heaven. I think that'll come up. My general sense is you can be a saint. Okay, like God has given you what you need in order to be a saint. So fear not. Despair not, be therefore encouraged, and be confident in that. So like God gives us a variety of means in order to attain to Him, the principle of which is His only begotten Son, so our Lord Jesus Christ, who took human flesh for love of us. And then you think also about the church and the sacraments. You can think about like the testimony and lives of the saints, the preaching of the church's pastors, the efficacy of sacramentals, the sacred liturgy. You can think about grace, virtues, gifts of the Holy Spirit. You can think about all kinds of things. So your state in life is one means that the Lord provides in order to attain to Him, but it's not the only means, right? And it's not even the most important means. The most important means is the Lord's sacred humanity. And in heaven, you'll neither be married nor given in marriage. Each of us will be wed to the Lord in a way that's whole and permanent and stable and surpassingly good. And so yeah, we seek to live for that life in the present with what God gives. And if you don't have a state in life, you still have a vocation because that vocation is heaven. Mario Barati asks, could you one day become a bishop? Unlikely. All right, student, have you ever read the writings of Blessed Francisco Palau? If you have time, will you read them and explain to us in another Pints with Aquinas episode? I haven't read them. I may read them. That is the commitment that I can make. All right, Ms. Goody Two Shoes says, Father Pine, you're a good man, sound, solid, balanced, reliable priest, prophet, and king. We need you to help handle the upcoming challenges. You're flexible in mercy, wisdom, truly Christ in the world. Thanks for that. I appreciate that very much. It's very generous. Do I think that Savonarola could be a saint to look up to? In certain regards, yes. The church is probably never going to canonize him because he got into a lot of apocalyptic preaching, which he associated with real-time events in the 15th century. And whenever you talk about the end times and assign them to a particular set of circumstances, that doesn't usually go too well. All right. Also, I live close to Switzerland, and can I come to visit you in Freiburg? Why not, man? Party on. Thanks, Ms. Goody Two Shoes. It's awesome. Brendan Thompson. Father Pine, thank you for your time and big brain. Question, does God call some people to be single instead of married or religious? God bless you. So I think that God calls everyone to heaven, all right? And God gives everyone means to get to heaven, and that one of those means is states in life, but the only things that qualify as states in life, strictly so called, are priesthood, religious life, and marriage. Why? Well, we call them vocations, right? We call them states of life because they're stable or settled states, which means that you have been ordained, so like orders, or you make a vow or a promise. So it constitutes you in a particular state. And we call states of life vocations by analogy to the vocation which each of us has to heaven. So, yes. So when it comes to that, I would not say that the single state is, the single state, while a state of a certain sort, is not a vocation, insofar as it's like not a thing that analogically is referred to the permanence of heaven. But God gives you other means. So it's a kind of absence of a state in life, and therefore an absence of one of the means that God could have or might have provided. But it doesn't leave you in the lurch insofar as you still have an abundance of good things which conduct you to the vision of God. Boom. All right, Irate Pixel, that's an awesome name, says, if you help in a confirmation class and the class uses a book which is no longer approved by the diocese due to age, would it be an act of disobedience to help out in that class? No. No, you're there to help, so just help, right? You don't have to right every wrong, and it doesn't strike me that it's like an egregious wrong. What you describe, it's just like a kind of outdatedness. If they were teaching things that were directly contrary to the faith for malicious reasons, and you were like somehow facilitating that, that'd be a different story. But what you described sounds different. Why does the Catechism put the exact text of the third commandment? I don't actually know. All right, here we go. Another question. Can a married couple practice NFP indefinitely for the sake of adopting children? In other words, can a married couple avoid pregnancy if they feel called to adopt instead? Wow, I've never thought about that. I don't know. My instinct is to say not in perpetuity, right? Because when you engage in a marriage, you say that you are open, right, to welcome new life, and you do so with the intent of welcoming new life. And the first acceptation of welcoming new life means that'd be your children, biologically conceived by you, husband and wife, through natural sexual intercourse. So I think that, I think that you wouldn't do that. No, I don't think so indefinitely. Perhaps periodically during times of your marriage, but not for the entirety of it. Can you explain the hierarchy in the Dominican Friars, student masters and all that, please? Yes, so there's a master of the order, and then the order is divided into different provinces, and each province elects a prior provincial, who is the major superior of that province. And then each dwelling or habitation elects a prior if it's of a sufficient size. If it's not of a sufficient size, then a superior is appointed. And then when it comes to formation, novices have a novice master and students have a student master. And those are the basic distinctions. So it's basically just master of the order, provincials, priors, all other Dominicans. And then within formation, you have a master. Boom, great question. How much is human sin directly responsible for natural disasters, diseases, and pain? Great question. There would have been certain natural evils, right? Regardless of whether or not man had sinned. When you think about the fact that lions ate antelopes in the garden previous to human sin. And there would have been, presumably there would have been climatic events that had negative effects on human civilization in some way, shape, or form. But subsequent to human sin, yes, they're all bound up with sin. So after the fall, after the commission of original and personal sin, we do draw an association between, all bad things and sin in some way, shape, or form. But we don't associate it in a way where we can say, this is because of this and this is because of this, because that's beyond our ken. All right. Here we go. Woodland poetry and books. Is it sinful to not be able to believe that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces? The biblical verse that speaks of Jesus as the one mediator seems to rule it out. I'm trying to believe it. Yes, so you don't have to believe that in the strictest of strict senses because it's not defined solemnly by the church as doctrine. That's mediatrix of all graces, advocate, and co-redemptrix is kind of... it's proposed as a fifth Marian dogma, but not necessarily, affirmed or ratified. There is a fittingness, obviously, to it for reasons that are explained at great length in Garrigou Lagrange's book, The Mother of Our Savior and Our Interior Life. So you might consult that as a good resource on this particular issue. I wouldn't twist yourself in knots. I would just read about it and then see what comes as a result, and hopefully it feeds your faith. And it doesn't lead to doubt or consternation. All right, with that, we are at the hour, so I'm going to tie things up. So a couple small things. This is Sponsored Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel and push the bell so that way you get updates. on things that go live on the channel or get posted to it. And then if you haven't yet, please do check out Godsplaining, which is a podcast of the Dominican Friars of the province of St. Joseph, to which I contribute. And you can find all kinds of things there. One sweet thing is if you check out godsplaining.org, we have 3 retreats this summer, so 2 in July and 1 in August. And you're most welcome. So there's one for all comers, one for young adults, one for like a young men's wilderness retreat. So check all those options out. And then also, as I mentioned at the top, I wrote a book. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly, and it's available for pre-order now on Amazon. So yeah, all about making decisions and living in freedom with a modicum of confidence, certitude, and boldness. So I hope that is of service to you. All right, that's all from me. My prayers are for you. Please pray for me, and I will catch you next time on Pints with Aquinas.